Alright, it's a psychological horror thriller type of game. Think Evil Within. You're basically in a world that's connected to your mind, and there's this system. Basically, that's your. It's kind of like a mental state, like there's a meter or a spectrum or something, where you basically have a state of sanity and whatnot, but this affects sanity and mood and confidence and stuff like that and anxiety, and all of these things are determined by choices in certain scenes, and it affects alternative events in the game and pathways and even full endings. But the main dynamic of the game is that it can basically force you into a basically, the state determines how powerful you are in the game and in what aspect. It determines all of your stats. And then there's another part, because I can't just. I don't think it'd be a very fair system. It was just based on. And I think it'd be way too easy to analytically plan your outcome. So depending on, there's another system that's tied to that, because I think there'd be such a very specific limitation, and people would basically just figure out the whole game and get the ending they wanted. I don't want it to be that simple. So there's a skill point system depending on the monsters you kill, and you can put it into certain points in order for there to be a higher or lower percentage chance of you making an action and it actually giving you the outcome or a higher or lower score on the psychological spectrum. So basically, the whole game you're going through trying to level up these stats in order to get the outcome that you desire, but it's more of a random percentage kind of thing. So you could still end up not getting the perfect run you want, the perfect choices you want, in order to get these choices made, in order to become more powerful or weaker in the end, and get these certain endings and branched out pathways of the game. But basically, depending on the choices and the outcomes and whatnot, and all of those things, and your states and the points, the tributes and whatnot, it could basically end up forcing you into a passive gameplay. It could basically force you into a passive partial run or complete run of the game, depending on how these decisions are made, because depending on the level of the psychological state, you will either be powerful, an OP badass, weaker than average, or basically you could try for 1,000,000 years and it'd be almost impossible for you to defeat an enemy. And it'd be all dependent on your psychological state, which are determined by the stats or the attributed skill bars and the events that are tied to those percentages. So you could end up getting a completely wildly different game experience depending on all of those factors. And I mean, because I've always had this idea that I want a game sort of like a psychological thriller horror, like The Evil Within or Silent Hill, all those kinds of games, where you can essentially be like a monstrous badass or passive, or something in between. I've been more fixated on the spectrum of that, and I've almost never seen that sort of option, that sort of diversity in games like that. I've only ever seen you go through this and you gotta stick with this storyline. And I mean, it's almost kind of like how different things will happen and different events will happen in what is it? The one with the fucking butterfly effect that had the Wendigos and shit. I can't remember what it's called. And it had the teenagers and stuff, and it was praised as like the first almost completely theatrical game that basically branched off into different paths and endings and decisions and such. Kind of like that, but in a Evil Within 2, Resident Evil sort of setting. This setting where there's monstrous types of creatures. But it's set kind of in your own mind that's connected, I don't know, probably to some like fucking AI machine or something. And depending on your state of mind, which is determined by the systems I've already explained to you, other monsters will be generated based on like anxieties and fears, and probably even like information given at the beginning. Like there might be some sort of like a test, depending on what's programmed into the game, where it asks you, are you afraid of certain situations? Are you afraid of certain animals or certain kinds of people and things like that? And certain monsters may or may not be generated based on that, and then factored into all the other mechanical systems of the game that determine the outcome and the progress and the diversity of the game content. So. Actually, I literally just came up with this concept in like 2 minutes ago, over the course of like 5 minutes. So, it's certainly a half-assed concept, because I fucking literally just came up with it. I've always wanted to come up with a good fucking, I've always thought about the concept, but I never thought about the, I just came up with a whole fucking psychological system and attributes and all the other stuff that I just mentioned. I've always had that I wanted to make a premise for a game like this, but it's where you're an OP badass, or had the potential at least, but I've never known how to possibly pull it off until like 5 minutes ago. So anyways, thanks for watching.